Sometimes the most precious moments in life come when we least expect them. There's nothing quite like the sound of a newborn's first cry, especially when that cry almost never came at all. In 1880s Wyoming, a wealthy rancher's wife goes into early labor with no doctor for miles. Her husband can only watch helplessly as his world falls apart. Then a poor drifter appears and uses old knowledge to save both mother and baby. When the grateful rancher offers him anything, gold, land, cattle, the cowboy makes a simple request that brings the rich man to tears. What could a man with nothing possibly ask for that would move a wealthy rancher so deeply? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Wyoming Territory in 1884 stretched endlessly under a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the earth whole. Dust devils danced across the prairie grass, and the wind carried stories of fortunes made and lost, of dreams planted in harsh soil, and lives carved from nothing but determination and grit. Augustus Whitfield stood on the wraparound porch of his grand ranch house, watching the sun paint the distant mountains in shades of amber and gold. At 38, he commanded respect throughout the territory, his name spoken with a mixture of admiration and wariness in saloons from Cheyenne to Laramie. The Whitfield Ranch sprawled across 20,000 acres of prime grazing land, home to the finest Hereford cattle this side of the Continental Divide. Augustus had built his empire through shrewd business dealings and an iron will that brooked no compromise. His square jaw and steel-gray eyes reflected a man accustomed to getting his way, whether negotiating cattle prices or settling boundary disputes with neighboring ranchers. The calloused hands that now gripped the porch railing told the story of his early years, back when he'd worked alongside his hired hands, branding cattle and mending fences under the scorching summer sun. But success had changed him in ways he didn't fully recognize. The young man who'd once shared his meager lunch with hungry drifters had gradually hardened into someone who viewed charity as weakness and sentiment as a luxury he couldn't afford. His wealth had become both shield and prison, protecting him from the harsh realities that still plagued those less fortunate, while isolating him from the simple human connections that once sustained his spirit. Inside the house, Adelaide Whitfield moved carefully through the spacious parlor, one hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. At 26, she carried herself with the grace of her Boston upbringing, though 3 years on the frontier had weathered her pale complexion and strengthened her delicate frame. Her auburn hair, once perfectly coiffed for society functions, now hung in a practical braid that fell past her shoulders. Adelaide had met Augustus during his business trip to Massachusetts 2 years prior. She'd been instantly drawn to his confident manner and the stories he told of building something magnificent from nothing but vision and hard work. The romance had been swift, perhaps too swift. She sometimes reflected, and before she fully understood what frontier life entailed, she'd found herself mistress of one of Wyoming's most prosperous ranches. The isolation had been the hardest adjustment. Back east, she'd been surrounded by neighbors, cultural events, and the constant hum of civilized society. Here the nearest town was a day's hard ride, and the closest neighbor lived 15 miles away, across rolling hills that seemed to stretch into eternity. During the long winter months, she might go weeks without seeing another woman, finding companionship only in the letters that arrived sporadically with the mail delivery. Yet she'd grown to love this wild land in ways that surprised her. There was something profoundly moving about watching the sunrise paint the mountains in brilliant colors no artist could capture. The night sky, unmarred by city lights, revealed more stars than she'd ever imagined existed. And the baby growing within her, their first child, had given her a sense of purpose that transcended her occasional loneliness. The baby was due in late autumn, but lately Adelaide had been experiencing strange sensations that worried her. Sharp pains would strike without warning, causing her to grip the nearest chair until they passed. She'd mentioned them to Augustus, but with no doctor nearby, and her pregnancy seemingly progressing normally. They'd both attributed the discomfort to the natural changes her body was undergoing. 20 miles northwest of the ranch house, Travis McKenna guided his tired bay gelding along a barely visible trail that wound between scattered boulders and patches of sagebrush. At 34, Travis bore the weathered appearance of a man who'd spent most of his adult life under the open sky. His brown hair hung past his collar, streaked with premature gray that spoke of hardships endured and sorrows carried. Deep lines around his green eyes told of countless days squinting against prairie sun and wind. Travis owned little more than the clothes on his back, his horse, and the few possessions secured in his worn saddlebags. A battered felt hat sat low on his forehead, its crown shaped by years of use and countless rainstorms. His shirt, once blue, had faded to the color of winter sky, and his leather vest bore the stains and scars of hard living. But despite his humble appearance, there was something in Travis's bearing that suggested depths beneath the surface, a quiet dignity that commanded respect even from those who might otherwise dismiss a man of his circumstances. Hidden beneath his shirt, close to his heart, Travis carried his most precious possession, a simple wooden cross carved from oak and hung on a leather cord. It had belonged to his mother, Margaret McKenna, who'd worn it every day of her life until the fever took her when Travis was barely 4 years old. The cross was all he had left of her, along with fragments of memories that grew hazier. With each passing year, what Travis remembered most clearly weren't images but sensations, the warmth of his mother's, and as she pressed cool cloths to his fevered brow, the sound of her voice humming lullabies in the darkness, and the faint scent of lavender that always seemed to surround her. She'd been a healer of sorts, one of those frontier women who possessed an intuitive understanding of herbs and remedies passed down through generations of necessity. After Margaret's death, Travis had been raised by an elderly midwife named Ruth Calloway, a woman whose reputation extended throughout the territory for her skill in bringing babies safely into the world. Ruth had recognized something in the young boy, perhaps the same gentle spirit that had made his mother such a gifted healer, and had taken great care to pass along her knowledge. For 15 years, Travis had accompanied Ruth on her calls, learning not just the practical skills of midwifery, but also the deeper understanding of human nature that made the difference between a successful delivery and a tragedy. Ruth had died when Travis was 19, leaving him with a wealth of knowledge he rarely had opportunity to use. The intervening years had been spent drifting from ranch to ranch, taking whatever work was available and never staying long enough to form lasting attachments. He'd learned early that revealing his medical knowledge often led to complications, desperate families begging him to help in situations beyond his abilities, or suspicious men questioning how a mere cowboy had come by such unusual skills. So Travis had learned to keep his past private, sharing his knowledge only when circumstances left him no choice. He'd delivered foals and calves when ranch animals were in distress, and on rare occasions had helped human mothers when no other assistance was available. But mostly he'd carried Ruth's teachings like a secret burden, useful knowledge locked away because the world had little place for a drifter who happened to know the mysteries of bringing life into the world. The worn leather journal in his saddlebag contained pressed flowers and brief notations about medicinal plants he'd encountered during his travels. Between its pages lay dried samples of willow bark for pain, echinacea for infection, and red raspberry leaves for women's troubles. Each specimen was carefully labeled in Travis's careful script, a habit Ruth had insisted upon. Knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied, she'd often said, but knowledge lost helps no one. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Travis realized his horse was showing signs of serious fatigue. The gelding's head hung low, and its breathing had become labored. They'd been traveling for 3 days, with only brief stops for rest, pushing hard to reach the next town before Travis's meager savings ran out completely. But it was becoming clear that the horse needed water and an extended rest before they could continue. In the distance, Travis spotted the distinctive buildings of a large ranch operation. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, and he could make out cattle dotting the surrounding pastures. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, the kind of spread that might have fresh water and perhaps a sympathetic owner willing to allow a traveler to rest his horse for a few hours. As Travis approached the ranch, he noted the quality of the construction and the obvious wealth it represented. The main house was a two-story structure built from locally quarried stone, with a slate roof that must have cost a fortune to transport from the east. Outbuildings included a massive barn, several equipment sheds, and living quarters for the ranch hands. Corrals held what appeared to be premium breeding stock, and everything showed the careful maintenance that only substantial resources could provide. Travis had learned long ago to read the character of a place before approaching. Some wealthy ranchers welcomed travelers with frontier hospitality, while others viewed strangers with suspicion and hostility. This spread was harder to judge, impressive but not ostentatious, prosperous but showing signs of honest work rather than inherited luxury. As he drew closer to the main house, Travis could hear voices raised in what sounded like distress. A man's voice, strained with panic, was calling out commands to unseen listeners. The urgency in those calls made Travis forget his own concerns about approaching uninvited. Something was seriously wrong, and his instincts, honed by years of responding to emergencies, told him that whatever was happening required immediate attention. He urged his tired horse into a faster pace, covering the final distance to the ranch house with growing concern. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, and Travis couldn't shake the feeling that he was riding toward a moment that would change everything, not just for whatever crisis awaited at the ranch, but for his own carefully guarded existence as well. The wooden cross beneath his shirt seemed to grow warmer against his chest, as if responding to some unseen force. Travis had learned to trust such feelings, though he couldn't explain their source. Ruth had always insisted that some knowledge came not from books or teaching, but from a deeper well of understanding that connected all living things. "Listen to your heart," she'd say when faced with difficult decisions. "It often knows things your mind hasn't figured out yet." As Travis dismounted near the ranch house, tying his horse to the hitching post with hands that moved automatically while his attention focused on the urgent voices within, he had no way of knowing that the next few hours would force him to use every skill Ruth had taught him. Nor could he imagine that the simple act of offering help to strangers would uncover secrets that had been buried for 30 years. Secrets that would test his capacity for forgiveness and reveal the true measure of human redemption. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. As Travis McKenna stepped toward the front door of the Whitfield Ranch and into a destiny that had been quietly waiting for him all his life. The morning had started like any other at the Whitfield Ranch. Adelaide had risen early, as was her habit, and spent the quiet hours before dawn reading by lamplight in the parlor. The baby had been restless during the night, making sleep difficult, but she'd attributed the discomfort to the natural progression of her pregnancy. Augustus had left after breakfast to check on a section of fence that needed repair, promising to return by midday. By noon, Adelaide was feeling decidedly unwell. Sharp pains that had been occasional over the past week were now coming with alarming frequency. She tried to continue with her normal routines, tending to the kitchen garden, organizing the linen closet, but each wave of pain forced her to stop and grip whatever solid surface was nearest until it passed. When Augustus returned for the midday meal, he found Adelaide doubled over in the kitchen, her face pale and beaded with perspiration. The sight of his normally composed wife in obvious distress sent a chill of fear through him that he'd never experienced before. "Adelaide, what's wrong?" He rushed to her side, steadying her with gentle hands. "The baby," she gasped between ragged breaths. "Something's not right. The pains are getting stronger, and they're coming too fast." Augustus felt his world tilt sideways. The baby wasn't due for another 6 weeks. He'd planned to take Adelaide to Denver well before her time, where a proper doctor could attend the birth. They discussed it numerous times, how he'd arrange for a comfortable hotel room and the best medical care his money could buy. But this was far too early, and there was no time for travel. "We need to get you to bed," Augustus said, trying to keep his voice calm while his mind raced through their limited options. The nearest doctor was in Laramie, more than 2 days' hard ride away. Even if he sent his fastest rider immediately, help wouldn't arrive for nearly a week. Adelaide gripped his arm as another contraction seized her. This one was stronger than the others, causing her to cry out despite her efforts to remain composed. "Augustus, I think the baby's coming now. Today." The next few hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. Augustus sent ranch hands racing in different directions, one toward Laramie to fetch the doctor, another to the neighboring Hartwell spread to see if their housekeeper had any experience with childbirth. But even as he gave these orders, Augustus knew they were merely gestures of desperate hope. Help was too far away, and Adelaide's labor was progressing too quickly. By mid-afternoon, Adelaide was bedridden and suffering through contractions that came every few minutes. Mrs. Hartwell's housekeeper had arrived and done what she could, but her experience was limited to helping with ranch animals. She'd taken one look at Adelaide's condition and quietly told Augustus that this was beyond her abilities. "You need someone who knows about birthing babies," she'd said, wringing her hands anxiously. "This little one's in a powerful hurry, and something don't feel right about it." Augustus paced the parlor like a caged animal, stopping frequently to listen to Adelaide's labored breathing from the bedroom above. He'd built an empire through careful planning and decisive action, but now he felt utterly helpless. All his wealth and influence meant nothing in the face of this crisis. There was no one to buy, no deal to negotiate, no problem to solve through sheer force of will. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when Travis McKenna appeared in the yard, his tired horse moving slowly toward the water trough near the barn. Augustus barely noticed the stranger at first, too consumed with worry to pay attention to anything beyond Adelaide's condition. It was Adelaide's sharp cry of pain that finally broke through Augustus's distraction. The sound was different this time, more urgent, more frightened, and it sent him running toward the stairs. As he reached the front door, he nearly collided with the dust-covered stranger who'd been approaching the house. "Pardon me, sir," Travis said, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "I heard someone in distress. Is there anything I can do to help?" Augustus barely glanced at the man. His clothes marked him as a drifter, probably looking for work or a handout. "This is a private matter," Augustus said curtly. "You'll need to move along." Another cry from upstairs made Augustus's blood run cold. This one was followed by Mrs. Hartwell's voice calling down urgently, "Mr. Whitfield, you need to come quickly." Travis stepped back respectfully, but didn't turn to leave. Something in the quality of those cries had triggered instincts honed by years of experience with Ruth Calloway. "Sir, forgive my boldness, but that sounds like a woman in difficult labor. If there's no doctor available, I might be able to help." Augustus spun around, desperation overriding his usual caution. "You? What could you possibly know about?" He stopped mid-sentence as he noticed something in the stranger's eyes. There was a calm certainty there, a quiet confidence that spoke of genuine knowledge rather than empty boasting. "I was raised by a midwife," Travis said simply. "I've assisted with difficult births before. If your wife is in trouble and there's no medical help coming soon, you might not have the luxury of being particular about who offers assistance." From upstairs came the sound of Mrs. Hartwell calling Augustus's name with increasing urgency. Time was running out, and Augustus could feel the weight of a decision that might determine whether his wife and child lived or died. The wooden cross beneath Travis's shirt seemed to pulse against his chest as he waited for Augustus's response. He could read the conflict in the wealthy rancher's face, pride warring against desperation, social prejudice battling with paternal fear. Travis had seen it before, though rarely in circumstances quite so dire. "What kind of experience?" Augustus asked finally, his voice hoarse with strain. 15 years learning from one of the territory's most respected midwives," Travis replied. "I won't lie to you. Every birth is different, and there are no guarantees. But if your wife is in trouble, doing nothing isn't really an option. Augustus closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds from upstairs. When he opened them again, the last of his resistance had crumbled. "All right," he said quietly. "Come with me. But if you're lying about your abilities—" "I'm not," Travis said simply, already moving toward the stairs. "But I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and a sharp knife. Can you get those things quickly?" As they climbed the stairs together, Augustus couldn't help but wonder if he was making the right choice. Everything in his experience told him to be suspicious of strangers, especially those with nothing to lose. But Adelaide's life hung in the balance, and sometimes desperate circumstances required leaps of faith that defied conventional wisdom. Behind them, Travis's tired horse stood at the water trough, finally getting the rest it needed. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The night ahead would test everyone in ways they couldn't yet imagine, but for now, there was only the immediate crisis and the slim hope that a stranger's unexpected knowledge might be enough to save 2 precious lives. Travis entered the bedroom with the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced similar crises before. Adelaide lay propped against pillows, her face flushed with exertion and pain. Mrs. Hartwell hovered nearby, wringing a damp cloth between nervous hands. The room felt thick with tension and fear. "Ma'am," Travis said gently, approaching Adelaide's bedside. "I'm Travis McKenna. Your husband has asked me to help with your delivery." Adelaide's eyes widened slightly as she took in his weathered appearance, but another contraction seized her before she could respond. Travis watched carefully, timing the duration and intensity with the practiced eye Ruth Calloway had trained. When the pain subsided, he spoke again in the same calm tone. "How long have the pains been coming this strong?" "Since early afternoon," Adelaide gasped. "They started mild this morning, but now—" She gripped the bedsheets as another wave began building. Travis nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The baby's in a hurry, that's certain. But babies sometimes know things we don't. May I examine you to see how things are progressing?" Augustus stepped forward protectively. "Is that necessary? If you want me to help your wife safely deliver this child—" "Yes," Travis replied without defensiveness. "I need to understand what we're dealing with before I can determine the best course of action." After a moment's hesitation, Augustus nodded. Travis washed his hands thoroughly in the basin Mrs. Hartwell provided, then conducted a brief but thorough examination. What he discovered made him frown slightly. The baby was positioned correctly, but Adelaide's body wasn't quite ready for delivery. The early labor meant complications were likely. "Mrs. Hartwell," Travis said quietly, "I'll need you to gather some supplies. Clean sheets, towels, a sharp knife, and the strongest thread you can find. Also, if there's any willow bark or chamomile in the house, bring that too." While Mrs. Hartwell hurried to gather the requested items, Travis turned his attention to creating what he'd need most, a proper birthing stool. Ruth had always insisted that allowing gravity to assist was crucial for difficult deliveries. But improvising the right support required both skill and creativity. "Mr. Whitfield, I need 2 sturdy chairs and some rope or leather strapping," Travis said as he rolled up his sleeves. "We're going to need to help your wife into a better position for delivery." Augustus watched in amazement as Travis efficiently constructed a makeshift birthing stool, using the chairs and strips of leather cut from an old harness. Every movement was purposeful and confident, revealing knowledge that went far beyond what any ordinary cowboy should possess. "Where did you learn to do this?" Augustus asked as Travis tested the stability of his construction. "A woman named Ruth Calloway taught me," Travis replied, adjusting the height of the improvised seat. "She delivered more babies in this territory than anyone alive. Said every child deserves the best chance at life, regardless of circumstances." Travis's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he prepared the room for what lay ahead. He positioned clean cloths within easy reach, ensured adequate lighting, and created a small workspace where he could tend to both mother and baby when the time came. Augustus found himself impressed, despite his natural skepticism about strangers. "The baby's coming early," Travis explained as he worked. "That means we need to be extra careful. Premature babies are fragile, and the birth process can be harder on both mother and child." Adelaide watched Travis's preparations with growing confidence. There was something reassuring about his calm competence, the way he moved without wasted motion or obvious anxiety. She'd been terrified that her baby might die, but this stranger's presence gave her the first real hope she'd felt since the pains began. "Have you delivered many babies?" she asked during a brief respite between contractions. "Enough to know that each one is different," Travis replied honestly. "But I've also learned that women are stronger than they know, and babies are tougher than they appear. We'll take this one step at a time." As the evening wore on, Travis coached Adelaide through the increasingly intense contractions while Augustus paced nervously nearby. The rancher struggled with feelings he'd never experienced: helplessness, fear, and a growing respect for the mysterious drifter who'd appeared at exactly the right moment. "Mr. Whitfield," Travis said during one of Adelaide's rest periods, "I need you to help me move your wife to the birthing stool. The baby's getting ready to make its appearance, and we want to give it every advantage." Augustus carefully helped Adelaide to the improvised seat, supporting her weight, while Travis positioned cushions and adjusted the setup for maximum comfort and efficiency. Despite the primitive conditions, Travis had managed to create something that looked almost professional. "Now comes the hard part," Travis said, kneeling in front of Adelaide. "When the next contraction comes, I want you to bear down with all your strength. Don't hold back. Trust your body to know what to do." Adelaide nodded, gathering her courage for what lay ahead. Augustus positioned himself beside her, offering his hand for support. Mrs. Hartwell stood ready with clean cloths and warm water. Everyone in the room understood that the next hour would determine whether this night ended in joy or tragedy. The ranch hands had gathered quietly outside the house, their usual evening routines forgotten as they waited for news. Word had spread that the boss's wife was in difficult labor, attended by a stranger who claimed to know something about birthing babies. The men spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories of other frontier births they'd witnessed, some successful and others heartbreakingly tragic. Inside the bedroom, Travis felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with holding lives in his hands. Ruth had taught him that every birth was a sacred trust, a moment when the boundary between life and death became thin as paper. He touched the wooden cross beneath his shirt briefly, drawing strength from the connection to his mother and the woman who'd raised him. "All right. Mrs. Whitfield," Travis said, as he saw the signs of another contraction beginning. "This is it. When I tell you to push, give me everything you've got." Adelaide gripped Augustus's hand tightly, her knuckles white with determination. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not, and their only choice was to meet the challenge with courage and skill. Travis positioned himself carefully, his hands steady despite the gravity of the moment. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and an owl called from the cottonwoods by the creek. Time seemed suspended as everyone in the house held their breath, waiting for the miracle or tragedy that would define this night forever. The night deepened as Adelaide's labor intensified beyond anything Travis had expected. What should have been a straightforward delivery was proving far more complicated than his initial examination had suggested. The baby seemed reluctant to emerge, and Adelaide's strength was beginning to flag after hours of grueling effort. "Something's not right," Travis murmured to Augustus during a brief moment when Adelaide dozed between contractions. "The baby's positioned correctly, but it's not descending as it should. We may be dealing with complications I can't see." Augustus felt his heart sink. "What kind of complications?" "Could be the cord. Could be the baby's size relative to early delivery, or could be something else entirely," Travis admitted honestly. Ruth always said the hardest part of midwifery was knowing when you'd reached the limits of what you could do. Adelaide stirred as another contraction began building. This one seemed different, more desperate somehow, as if her body was making one last effort to accomplish what nature intended. She gripped the sides of the birthing stool, her face contorting with pain that went beyond anything she'd experienced before. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do this anymore." Travis moved closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Whitfield, look at me. You've been incredibly strong tonight, stronger than most women could ever be. But I need you to find just a little more strength. Your baby needs you to keep fighting." From his saddlebag, Travis retrieved Adelaide's embroidered baby blanket, a delicate creation she'd been working on for months, stitched with hope and dreams for the child she carried. Mrs. Hartwell had brought it down earlier, thinking it might provide comfort. Now, as Travis held it up, the lamplight caught the intricate patterns Adelaide had so carefully created. "Think about this little one," Travis said, showing her the blanket. "Think about holding your baby wrapped in something you made with your own hands. That baby is fighting just as hard as you are to get here safely." Adelaide's eyes focused on the blanket, and something shifted in her expression. The exhaustion didn't disappear, but determination flickered back to life beneath it. "Tell me what to do," she whispered. Travis positioned himself carefully, his hands ready to guide the baby when it finally decided to emerge. With the next contraction, "I want you to bear down harder than you ever have before. Don't save anything. Give me everything you've got left." Augustus watched his wife summon reserves of strength he hadn't known she possessed. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her jaw was set with the same determination he'd seen her display when facing the isolation and hardships of frontier life. She'd proven her courage in small ways every day since arriving in Wyoming. Now she was called upon to demonstrate it in the most fundamental way possible. The contraction built slowly, and Adelaide bore down with everything she had. Travis felt the baby shift position slightly, moving at last in the right direction. "That's it," he encouraged. "I can see the head. One more like that, and we might have this little one in our arms." Mrs. Hartwell bustled around the room, keeping fresh water heated and clean cloths ready. She'd assisted with farm animal births, but never anything like this. The intensity and duration of Adelaide's labor was frightening, and she found herself silently praying for a successful outcome. Outside, the ranch hands had built a small fire and were taking turns standing watch. They'd heard enough difficult births to know that things could go wrong quickly, and they wanted to be ready if Travis needed additional help. The foreman, a grizzled man named Jack Morrison, kept checking his pocket watch and shaking his head at how long this was taking. "Been at this for near 8 hours, Morrison said quietly to the other men. "And that's a powerful long time for a first baby, especially one coming early." Back in the bedroom, Travis was beginning to face the reality that this delivery might require more drastic intervention than he was equipped to provide. Adelaide was tiring rapidly, and the baby seemed to be stuck despite her heroic efforts. He thought of Ruth's teachings about when to keep fighting and when to accept that some battles couldn't be won. But then Adelaide surprised everyone, including Travis. Drawing on some deep well of maternal instinct and sheer stubborn will, she pushed with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her physical capabilities. Travis felt the baby move decisively downward, and suddenly he could see more than just the top of the head. "The shoulders are coming," Travis said, his voice tight with concentration. "Mrs. Whitfield, you're doing beautifully. Just a little more." Adelaide seemed to find one last reservoir of energy. With Augustus gripping her hand and whispering encouragement, she pushed again with everything she had left. Travis guided the baby carefully, his hands steady despite the tension of the moment, and then, suddenly, the baby slipped free into Travis's waiting hands, but the tiny form was completely still and silent. Travis's heart sank as he looked at the limp infant. The baby was smaller than normal, as expected with the early delivery, but more concerning was the bluish tinge to the skin and the complete absence of movement or sound. This was the moment Ruth had warned him about, when all the skill in the world might not be enough to overcome the harsh realities of frontier childbirth. "Is the baby—" Augustus began, but couldn't finish the question. Travis didn't answer immediately. Instead, he began working with swift, practiced movements, clearing the baby's airways and attempting to stimulate breathing using techniques Ruth had taught him. The room fell silent, except for Adelaide's exhausted breathing and the sound of Travis working desperately to bring life to the tiny form in his hands. Adelaide lay back against the birthing stool, too exhausted to lift her head, but she could read the situation from the silence. "My baby," she whispered. "Please tell me my baby is all right." Travis continued his efforts, refusing to give up even as the seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The wooden cross beneath his shirt seemed to burn against his chest, and he found himself silently pleading for the miracle this family desperately needed. The baby's life hung in the balance, and with it, the hopes and dreams of everyone in that lamp-lit room. Time seemed suspended in the lamplight as Travis worked with desperate intensity over the silent infant. He cleared the tiny airways again, then began a gentle but firm massage of the baby's chest, counting rhythmically under his breath the way Ruth had taught him. 1, 2, 3, breathe for the baby. 4, 5, 6, massage the heart. "Come on, little one," Travis whispered, his voice barely audible. "Your mama's been fighting all night for you. Don't give up now." Augustus stood frozen beside Adelaide, his face white with terror. In all his years of building his empire, of facing down hostile competitors and dangerous weather, he'd never felt fear like this. The complete helplessness of watching his child's life hang in the balance was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Adelaide tried to lift her head, exhaustion warring with desperate need to see her baby. "Travis, please," she whispered. "Tell me what's happening." "Still working," Travis said calmly, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. He adjusted his technique, remembering a particularly difficult birth he'd assisted Ruth with years earlier. Sometimes babies needed a different kind of encouragement to take their first breath. 30 seconds passed. Then 45. Travis continued his methodical efforts, refusing to accept defeat even as his own heart began to sink. He thought of all the times Ruth had told him that babies chose their own moment to enter the world, that sometimes they needed a little extra time to decide life was worth the struggle. And then, just as despair began to creep into the corners of his mind, the baby's tiny chest shuddered. Travis felt the movement and immediately adjusted his position, supporting the infant differently while continuing the gentle stimulation. "Come on," he murmured. "That's it. Try again." Another shudder, stronger this time. Then a tiny gasp that was barely audible but sounded like the most beautiful music Travis had ever heard. The baby's skin began to shift from blue to pink, starting at the chest and spreading outward as precious oxygen finally began flowing through tiny lungs. "There we go," Travis said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "There's our fighter." The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused but unmistakably alive. Tiny fists unclenched and waved weakly in the air. And then, as if making up for the terrifying silence, the infant let out a lusty cry that filled the room with the sound of life triumphant. Augustus felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. The sound of his child's voice, strong and healthy despite the difficult birth, was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. "Is the baby, will it be all right?" Travis smiled for the first time all night as he carefully cleaned the infant and wrapped it in Adelaide's embroidered blanket. "Small but strong. Your son is going to be just fine, son." Adelaide breathed, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "I have a son?" "A beautiful, healthy son," Travis confirmed, placing the bundled baby in Adelaide's arms. "And he's got quite a set of lungs on him." Adelaide looked down at her child's face, and the world seemed to shift on its axis. All the pain and fear of the long night faded into insignificance compared to the miracle she held in her arms. The baby's eyes seemed to focus on her face, and she felt a connection deeper than anything she'd ever imagined possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mama, and I love you so very much." Augustus moved closer, reaching out with one tentative finger to touch his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers immediately curled around his father's finger with surprising strength, and Augustus felt tears he hadn't shed since childhood start to flow. "He's perfect," Augustus said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Absolutely perfect. Travis busied himself with the necessary aftercare, ensuring Adelaide's continued health and monitoring both mother and baby for any signs of complications. But his professional attention couldn't quite mask the profound satisfaction he felt at seeing this family united and whole. This was why Ruth had dedicated her life to midwifery, for moments exactly like this. As the immediate crisis passed, Augustus found himself looking at Travis with new eyes. This weather-beaten drifter, whom he'd initially dismissed as just another vagrant seeking handouts, had just performed what could only be described as a miracle. Without Travis's knowledge and skill, Augustus was certain he would have lost both his wife and child tonight. "I don't know how to thank you," Augustus said finally. "What you've done tonight, there's no way to repay it." Travis finished cleaning up his improvised medical supplies and began packing them away. "No payment needed. I'm just glad I could help. But surely there's something," Augustus pressed. "Anything you need. Money, land, cattle, a job here on the ranch. Name it and it's yours." Travis paused in his packing, Augustus's silver pocket watch catching the lamplight as the rancher pulled it out to check the time. Dawn was still hours away, but the worst was definitely behind them. The watch was clearly a family heirloom, elaborately engraved, and worth more than Travis had seen in years of drifting from job to job. "That's very generous," Travis said quietly. "But I don't need payment for doing what anyone decent would do." Augustus shook his head. "This wasn't just anyone being decent. This was skill and knowledge that saved my family. I've built everything I have through hard work and fair dealing, and I won't accept charity even when it comes disguised as kindness." Mrs. Hartwell had quietly withdrawn to give the family privacy, but she could hear the conversation from the hallway. She'd seen many acts of kindness in her years on the frontier, but nothing quite like what this stranger had done tonight. The man had literally brought life back from the edge of death, and he was refusing any reward for it. Travis finished packing his simple supplies and looked at the peaceful scene of Adelaide nursing her newborn son, while Augustus watched with obvious adoration. This was what made all the hardship worthwhile, seeing families whole and healthy, witnessing the miracle of new life entering the world safely. "Mr. Whitfield," Travis said finally, "if you really feel the need to repay me, just promise me you'll never take this for granted. What you have here, your wife, your son, your home, these are treasures beyond any price." Augustus nodded solemnly. "I promise, but the offer stands. Anything you need, anything at all, you just have to ask." Travis shouldered his saddlebag and moved toward the door. "I appreciate that more than you know. But right now, what I need most is to let you folks rest and enjoy your new son." As Travis reached the bedroom door, Augustus called after him. "At least stay the night. Your horse needs rest and dawn's still hours away." Travis paused, considering. His horse was indeed exhausted, and he had nowhere particular to be. "All right. I'll sleep in the barn if that's acceptable." "Nonsense," Augustus said firmly. "Mrs. Hartwell will prepare the guest room. It's the least we can do." As Travis disappeared down the hallway, Augustus looked at his wife and son, bathed in the golden lamplight. The silver pocket watch in his hand seemed to tick more slowly now, as if time itself had been transformed by the night's events. Everything felt different, more precious, more meaningful, more connected to something larger than his own ambitions and wealth. Dawn broke slowly over the Whitfield ranch, painting the eastern sky in soft shades of rose and gold. Travis had slept fitfully in the guest room, his mind still processing the events of the night. He'd delivered babies before, but few had come so close to tragedy. The memory of that terrifying silence when the infant first emerged would stay with him for years to come. He dressed quietly and made his way downstairs, intending to check on his horse and continue his journey before the family woke. But as he passed the kitchen, he found Augustus already there, sitting at the oak table with a cup of coffee steaming before him. The rancher looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Morning," Augustus said, looking up from his contemplation. "Coffee's fresh if you'd like some." Travis accepted the cup gratefully, savoring the rich flavor. It had been weeks since he'd tasted coffee this good, another reminder of the comfortable life wealth could provide. "Our Mrs. Whitfield and the baby, both sleeping peacefully," Augustus replied, a smile creasing his tired features. "Adelaide fed him twice during the night, and he's already showing signs of being a healthy eater. She's calling him William, after her father." "William's a fine name," Travis said, settling into the chair across from Augustus. "He'll grow into it well." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two men who'd shared an intense experience but remained essentially strangers. Finally, Augustus leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I've been sitting here for hours, trying to figure out how to properly thank you for what you did last night. I keep coming back to the same conclusion. There's nothing adequate I can offer." Travis set down his coffee cup carefully. "Mr. Whitfield, you don't owe me anything. What happened last night was just one human being helping another in need." "No," Augustus said firmly. "It was much more than that. You saved my wife's life and my son's life using knowledge and skill that took years to acquire. That kind of expertise has value, whether you want to acknowledge it or not." Augustus stood and walked to a cabinet, retrieving a rolled document that he spread on the table between them. It was a hand-drawn map of the ranch property, detailed and precisely measured. Travis found himself studying the careful markings, noting the boundaries, water sources, and various landmarks. "This ranch covers 20,000 acres of prime grazing land," Augustus said, pointing to different sections of the map. "I'm offering you 1,000 acres of your choosing, plus breeding stock to get you started. You could build something substantial here, something lasting." Travis looked at the property deed map with genuine appreciation for the generous offer, but shook his head slowly. "That's incredibly generous, but I'm not the settling type." "Never have been." "Then gold," Augustus pressed. "I can have $5,000 transferred from my bank in Denver. That's enough to set you up anywhere you choose to go. Mr. Whitfield." "Augustus, please. After what you've done, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Augustus, then. I appreciate the offer more than I can express." "But I don't need your money." Augustus studied Travis's weathered face, trying to understand the man who'd appeared so suddenly and transformed their lives. "What do you need?" "There has to be something. Every man has dreams, goals, something he's working toward." Travis was quiet for a long moment, his fingers unconsciously finding the wooden cross beneath his shirt. Through the kitchen window, he could see the sun climbing higher, promising another hot day on the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," Travis said finally. "But the truth is I've learned to live without needing much. My horse, my saddle, enough work to keep food in my belly and a roof over my head when the weather turns bad. That's been sufficient for most of my adult life." "But surely there's something," Augustus persisted. "Some dream you've had to set aside, some goal you've never been able to pursue because you lacked resources." Travis stood and walked to the window, looking out at the vast expanse of ranch land. In the distance, he could see cattle grazing peacefully, and closer to the house, ranch hands were beginning their morning routines. It was a well-ordered, prosperous operation, built through Augustus's vision and determination. "You know what strikes me most about your ranch?" Travis said, not turning around. "It's not the size or the quality of the cattle, or even the obvious wealth it represents. It's the sense of permanence. Everything here is built to last, to be passed down through generations." Augustus nodded, though Travis couldn't see him. "That's exactly what I had in mind when I started building this place. I wanted to create something that would outlast me, something William could inherit and be proud of. Legacy is important," Travis agreed, still gazing out the window. "And knowing that you'll be remembered, that your life mattered to someone. Most people take that for granted. Having family to remember them, a place where their name will be spoken with respect after they're gone." Something in Travis's tone made Augustus look at him more carefully. There was a wistfulness there, a hint of loss that suggested personal experience with the absence of such connections. "Do you have family, Travis? People who'll remember you?" Travis turned from the window, his expression carefully neutral. "No, My mother died when I was young, and the woman who raised me passed on years ago. I suppose that's part of why I've never felt the need to accumulate possessions or put down roots. When you don't have anyone to leave things to, material wealth becomes less important. Augustus felt a pang of sympathy for the man who'd saved his family. Here was someone who'd dedicated his life to helping others bring new life into the world. Yet he'd apparently never had the chance to build a family legacy of his own. All the more reason to accept my offer, Augustus said earnestly. You could build something here, create the kind of permanence you were talking about. Travis smiled sadly. I appreciate the thought, but building a legacy requires more than just land and money. It requires connections, relationships, a sense of belonging somewhere. Those aren't things that can be given. They have to grow naturally over time. Augustus was about to respond when the sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Adelaide's approach. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving carefully but with obvious determination. In her arms, she carried baby William, who was awake and alert. Good morning, she said, her voice still weak but warm with contentment. I wanted to thank our guardian angel properly before he disappeared on us. Travis rose respectfully. Mrs. Whitfield, you should be resting. I've been in bed all night. Besides, I couldn't let you leave without expressing my gratitude. She looked down at William, who was gazing around with the intense curiosity of a newborn. He's perfect, isn't he? He's beautiful, Travis agreed and meant it. You should be very proud. Adelaide looked between Travis and her husband, sensing the tension in the room. Augustus has been trying to find an appropriate way to thank you, hasn't he? He's been very generous with his offers, Travis said diplomatically. But you've refused them all, Adelaide observed. May I ask why? Travis looked at Adelaide, holding her precious son, and something shifted deep within his chest. The sight of this family, whole, healthy, and blessed with a future full of possibilities, stirred memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Perhaps it was the exhaustion from the long night, or maybe it was the simple human need to finally share a burden he'd carried alone for too long. There is one thing, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Augustus straightened immediately. Name it. Whatever it is, if it's within my power to provide, it's yours. Travis walked back to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. When he spoke, his words came slowly, as if each one cost him considerable effort. There's someone buried on your land. Someone who died here 30 years ago, forgotten and unmarked. I'd like to see her given a proper headstone. The kitchen fell silent, except for the gentle sounds of baby William stirring in his mother's arms. Augustus felt something cold settle in his stomach, though he couldn't yet understand why. Someone buried on my land, Augustus asked carefully. I've owned this property for 15 years. I've never heard of anyone being buried here. Travis turned from the window, his green eyes holding depths of old pain that made Augustus uncomfortable. Her name was Margaret McKenna. She died in the winter of 1854, and she's buried on the hill overlooking the creek. There's nothing marking the spot now, except a piece of weathered wood that's barely standing. The name hit Augustus like a physical blow. Margaret McKenna. Suddenly he was 23 years old again, standing in the doorway of a cabin he'd built with his own hands, looking down at a desperate woman, heavy with child. The memory came flooding back with terrible clarity. Her pleading eyes, her obvious exhaustion, the way she'd begged for shelter from the approaching blizzard. Dear God, Augustus whispered, sinking into his chair as the full horror of understanding washed over him. You remember her, Travis said. And it wasn't a question. Adelaide looked between the two men, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. Augustus, what's wrong? Who was Margaret McKenna? Augustus couldn't speak. His mind was trapped in that moment 3 decades past, reliving one of the most shameful decisions of his life. He'd been young then, proud and foolish, convinced that showing weakness or charity would undermine his chances of building something substantial in this harsh land. She came to your door in a snowstorm, Travis continued, his voice steady but edged with old grief. She was 8 months pregnant and desperate for shelter. The nearest town was 20 miles away, and the storm was getting worse by the hour. I remember, Augustus managed, his voice hollow. She begged you to let her stay just until the storm passed. She offered to work for her keep, to do anything you needed. But you turned her away, Adelaide gasped, looking at her husband with shock and dawning understanding. Augustus, you didn't— I did, Augustus said, the words like ashes in his mouth. I was young and stupid and scared. I thought if word got out that I was soft, other people would try to take advantage. I told her I couldn't spare the space or the supplies. Travis nodded slowly. She made it about a mile before the storm became too much. Found shelter in a rock overhang, but it wasn't enough. She died there during the night, along with her baby. The weight of that ancient sin settled on Augustus's shoulders like a physical burden. He'd buried the memory deep, told himself that his decision had been practical, even necessary. But seeing his own wife and child, safe in his arms, brought the full magnitude of his cruelty into sharp focus. The midwife who found her the next day was named Ruth Calloway. Travis continued. Ruth buried her properly and took in the 4-year-old boy who'd been traveling with her. That boy was me. The revelation hit the room like thunder. Adelaide's hand flew to her mouth, and Augustus felt the world tilt around him. The man who'd saved his family, who'd refused every offer of payment, was the son of the woman he'd condemned to death through his selfishness and pride. You're her son. Augustus whispered. Margaret McKenna was my mother, Travis confirmed, and the unmarked grave on your property is all that remains of the woman who gave me life. Augustus buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by shame and regret that threatened to crush him. I killed her. My pride and selfishness killed your mother. No, Travis said firmly. The storm killed her. Circumstances killed her. You made a choice that a young, frightened man thought was necessary for his survival. I'm not here for revenge, Augustus. I'm here because last night you opened your home to a stranger and trusted him with your family's lives. You've grown into the man you weren't ready to be 30 years ago. Adelaide looked at Travis with tears streaming down her face. How can you forgive him? How can you even stand to be in the same room? Travis was quiet for a long moment, his hand unconsciously moving to the wooden cross beneath his shirt. Because I've learned that carrying hatred only poisons the one who carries it. And because Ruth taught me that people can change, that redemption is always possible for those willing to seek it. He pulled an object from his pocket, a piece of weathered wood, carved with crude letters that spelled out M.M. and Baby McKenna. The makeshift grave marker was barely holding together, its edges worn smooth by decades of weather. This is all that marks my mother's resting place, Travis said, setting the fragile wood on the table. For 30 years she's lain there forgotten by everyone except me. All I want is a proper stone with her name carved deep enough to last. Something that says Margaret McKenna was here, that she mattered, that her life had meaning even though it ended too soon. Augustus stared at the crude marker, his tears falling freely now. The simplicity of the request, just a headstone for a forgotten grave, made his earlier offers of land and gold seem almost insulting. This man wanted nothing for himself, only dignity for his mother's memory. Of course, Augustus said, his voice breaking. Of course we'll do that. We'll commission the finest stonemason in the territory. Marble, granite, whatever you think she would have wanted. Travis shook his head gently. Something simple. Local stone with her name and dates. Maybe a line about her being beloved. That's all she needs. Just recognition that she lived and loved and deserved better than she got. Augustus stood slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. Travis, there are no words for how sorry I am. If I could go back and change that night, we can't change the past, Travis interrupted gently. But we can honor it properly. That's all I'm asking for. The days that followed, the revelation passed in a strange mixture of healing and preparation. Augustus had insisted that Travis remain at the ranch while they arranged for the proper memorial, and Travis had agreed, recognizing that this process needed to unfold naturally rather than be rushed. Augustus threw himself into the task of creating the perfect headstone, with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He rode to town and spoke with every craftsman available, finally settling on Jonas Carpenter, a stonemason whose reputation for beautiful memorial work extended throughout the territory. But Augustus wasn't content to simply commission the work and wait. He wanted to be involved in every detail. "I need to understand what you want," Augustus told Travis as they sat in his study, sketching designs and discussing materials. "This isn't just about placing a stone. This is about making sure your mother is honored the way she deserved to be honored 30 years ago." Travis watched Augustus work with a mixture of admiration and sadness. The rancher's determination to create something meaningful was obvious, but Travis could also see the guilt eating away at him. Augustus slept little and ate less, consumed by the need to somehow make amends for a decision that couldn't be undone. "She was a simple woman," Travis said gently, as Augustus showed him elaborate design sketches. "She would have appreciated something beautiful, but not ostentatious. Something that spoke of love rather than wealth." Together, they settled on a design carved from local sandstone, warm golden rock that would weather gracefully and complement the natural beauty of the hillside location. The inscription would be simple but meaningful. "Margaret McKenna, beloved mother and healer, 1820–1854. She brought light to dark places." Jonas Carpenter proved to be not just a skilled craftsman, but an artist who understood the emotional weight of memorial work. When Augustus explained the circumstances, though not the full story of his connection, to the woman being honored, Jonas nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd helped many families find peace through proper remembrance. "A headstone isn't just about marking a grave," Jonas told them as he began his work. "It's about giving the living a place to focus their love and memories. This stone will speak for your mother long after we're all gone." Augustus insisted on helping with the carving, his inexperienced hands guided by Jonas's patient instruction. The work was slow and demanding, requiring careful attention to every detail. As Augustus chiseled letters into the warm stone, he found himself thinking constantly about the woman whose name he was immortalizing. "Tell me about her," Augustus said one afternoon as they worked together in Jonas's workshop. "Tell me what she was like." Travis paused in his own work. He'd been carving decorative borders under Jonas's supervision, and his expression grew distant with memory. "I was only 4 when she died, so mostly I remember feelings rather than specific details. But Ruth told me stories over the years." "What kind of stories?" "She had a gift for healing," Travis said, his hands never stopping their careful work on the stone. "Not just knowledge of herbs and remedies, though she had plenty of that. She had a way of comforting people, of making them feel less afraid when they were hurting. Ruth said people would travel 50 miles just to have my mother tend to their sick children." Augustus felt each word like a knife in his chest. The woman he'd turned away hadn't been just any desperate traveler. She'd been someone who dedicated her life to helping others, someone whose loss had deprived the world of genuine goodness. "She never married," Travis continued. "Ruth said she'd loved a man who died in a river accident before I was born. But she never let that make her bitter. She just poured all her love into helping people and raising me." What was she doing traveling? "Alone with a child in winter?" Augustus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Following rumors of a doctor who might be able to help a family whose child was dying of fever." The trip was dangerous, but she couldn't ignore the plea for help. That was who she was. She'd risk everything to save a life. The irony wasn't lost on either man. Margaret McKenna had died trying to help others while traveling to ask for shelter from a man who would, 30 years later, be saved by her son's willingness to help strangers. Adelaide had recovered quickly from William's birth and often joined them in the workshop, bringing meals and offering quiet support. She'd developed a deep respect for Travis during their conversations, but she was also worried about the toll this process was taking on her husband. "He barely sleeps," she confided to Travis one evening as they watched Augustus continue working on the stone by lamplight. "He keeps saying he has to make it perfect, that anything less would be another insult to her memory. Guilt is a heavy burden," Travis replied. "Sometimes the only way to carry it is to transform it into something meaningful." "Do you really forgive him?" Adelaide asked directly. "I know you say you do, but how is that possible?" Travis was quiet for a long moment, watching Augustus's careful work on the memorial. "Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about choosing not to let the past poison the present. Augustus was a different person 30 years ago, younger, more frightened, less wise. The man I see now isn't someone who would turn away a desperate woman." "But she was your mother." "Yes, and she taught me that love is stronger than hate, even when I was too young to understand the lesson fully." Ruth continued that teaching. Both of them would want me to choose forgiveness over revenge. As the days passed, word of the memorial project spread quietly through the community. Ranch hands spoke in respectful tones about the mysterious grave that was finally receiving proper attention. Several neighbors offered to help with the ceremony that Augustus was planning, sensing that this was more than just a simple memorial service. Mrs. Hartwell had taken special interest in researching Margaret McKenna's life, speaking with long-time residents who might remember her. What she discovered only reinforced Travis's memories. Margaret had indeed been beloved throughout the territory for her healing skills and generous spirit. "She delivered my oldest sister," one elderly rancher's wife told Mrs. Hartwell. "Saved both mother and baby when things went wrong. Never asked for payment either, just whatever folks could spare." Jonas completed the headstone on a crisp autumn morning, the carved letters deep and clean in the golden stone. Augustus ran his fingers over the inscription, feeling the permanence of the words he'd helped create. For the first time since learning the truth about Travis's identity, he felt something approaching peace. "It's beautiful," Travis said simply, and Augustus could hear genuine satisfaction in his voice. "Is it enough?" Augustus asked. "Can it ever be enough?" Travis placed a hand on Augustus's shoulder. "It's exactly what she would have wanted. A simple recognition that her life had meaning and that she was loved. That's all any of us can hope for." The morning of the memorial service dawned clear and bright, with autumn painting the cottonwoods along the creek in brilliant shades of gold and amber. Augustus had spent the week before sending word to every neighbor within 50 miles, explaining only that they were holding a service to honor someone who'd been buried without proper recognition 30 years earlier. The response had surprised him. By mid-morning, more than 40 people had gathered on the hillside overlooking the creek where Margaret McKenna lay buried. Ranch families, townspeople, even some of the older settlers who remembered the harsh winter of 1854. All had come to pay their respects to a woman most had never met but whose story had touched them. Deeply, Travis stood beside the carefully placed headstone, overwhelmed by the turnout. In his saddlebag, he carried his mother's most precious possession, a worn leather Bible with her name inscribed on the cover in fading ink. Ruth had saved it from the few belongings Margaret had carried on that final, tragic journey. She would be amazed by this, Travis said quietly to Augustus as they watched people continuing to arrive. She never thought of herself as someone important enough to be remembered by so many, Augustus nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He'd barely slept in days, consumed by the magnitude of what this ceremony represented. This wasn't just about honoring Margaret McKenna's memory. It was about publicly acknowledging his own failures and seeking some form of redemption for a sin that had haunted him for 3 decades. Adelaide approached them, carrying baby William wrapped in a warm blanket. At 3 weeks old, the infant was thriving, his cheeks round and pink with health. She'd insisted on attending the service, despite Augustus's concerns about her still fragile condition. He should be here, she'd said simply. This woman's son saved his life. William should be present when we honor her memory. The crowd gathered in a natural semicircle around the new headstone, its golden surface gleaming in the autumn sunlight. The inscription Travis and Augustus had crafted together stood out clearly against the warm stone. Margaret McKenna, beloved mother and healer, 1820-1854. She brought light to dark places, Augustus stepped forward to address the gathering, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded the notes he'd prepared. He'd spent hours writing and rewriting his remarks, trying to find words adequate for the occasion. But now, looking out at the sea of expectant faces, he realized that only simple truth would suffice. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the hillside. "We've gathered here today to honor the memory of Margaret McKenna, a woman who died on this land 30 years ago during one of the worst blizzards in territorial history." A murmur ran through the crowd as people absorbed this information. Many remembered that terrible winter, when the snow had fallen for days and temperatures had dropped so low that cattle froze standing up. Margaret McKenna was traveling with her 4-year-old son when the storm struck, Augustus continued, his voice growing stronger as he found his rhythm. She was a healer, a woman who dedicated her life to helping others in their times of greatest need. She died trying to find shelter, and for 30 years, her grave has gone unmarked and largely forgotten. Augustus paused, looking directly at Travis, who stood with quiet dignity beside the headstone. But her son survived. He was raised by a midwife named Ruth Calloway, who taught him his mother's healing arts. And 3 weeks ago, that son appeared at my door during a crisis and used his knowledge to save my wife and newborn child. A ripple of understanding moved through the crowd as people began to grasp the profound connections being revealed. Augustus's voice grew heavier with emotion as he continued. "I stand before you today, not just to honor Margaret McKenna's memory, but to confess a truth I've carried for 30 years. His voice broke slightly, but he pressed on. "When Margaret came to my door that night seeking shelter from the storm, I turned her away. I was young and proud and foolish, concerned only with protecting what I thought was mine. My decision condemned her to death in that blizzard. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Augustus struggled to continue. The man who saved my family is the son of the woman I failed to save. He could have let me suffer the consequences of my ancient selfishness. Instead, he chose mercy. He chose to heal rather than harm, to give life rather than take it." Augustus turned to Travis, tears flowing freely down his weathered cheeks. "Travis McKenna, you are a better man than I was at your age, a better man than I deserved to encounter in my moment of greatest need. Your mother raised you well, and Ruth Calloway continued her work. They would both be proud of the man you've become." Travis stepped forward, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. He opened his mother's Bible, its pages yellow with age, and found the passage he'd chosen for this moment. His voice was steady as he read from the book of Isaiah, words his mother had underlined in faint pencil decades earlier. "The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail." Travis closed the Bible gently and looked out at the assembled crowd. "My mother lived by these words. She believed that helping others, especially in their darkest moments, was the highest calling any person could have. She died pursuing that calling, and I choose to honor her memory by following the same path." The autumn sun climbed higher, warming the faces of the mourners gathered around Margaret McKenna's grave. For the first time in 30 years, she was not alone on that hillside. Travis carefully closed his mother's Bible and placed it on top of the new headstone, its worn leather cover dark against the golden stone. The simple gesture seemed to complete something that had been broken for 30 years, a connection between memory and reality, between past and present, between grief and healing. Margaret McKenna lived only 34 years, Travis continued, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hillside. But in that time, she touched more lives than many people who lived twice as long. She believed that every person deserved compassion, that every life had value, and that healing was the most sacred work anyone could do. The autumn wind stirred the cottonwood leaves, creating a gentle rustling that seemed to whisper approval over the gathering. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily against the brilliant blue sky, and Travis found himself remembering Ruth's Words about how the departed never truly left. They simply took new forms in the world around those who loved them. An elderly woman stepped forward from the crowd, Mrs. Sarah Brennan, whose weathered face spoke of decades on the frontier. Her gnarled hands shook slightly as she addressed the gathering, but her voice carried the strength of absolute conviction. "I knew Margaret McKenna," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She delivered my first child in '53, during a terrible ice storm when no one else could get through. My baby was turned wrong and I was dying. The midwife from town couldn't make it through the drifts, and my husband was beside himself with fear." Mrs. Brennan paused, wiping tears from her eyes with a lace handkerchief that had seen better days. "Margaret heard about our trouble and walked 12 miles through knee-deep snow to reach us. She worked for 18 hours straight to save us both, never once complaining about the cold or the danger. When it was over, and my daughter was safely nursing, Margaret just smiled and said that every baby deserved the best chance at life." The elderly woman's voice grew stronger as she continued. "I named my daughter Margaret in her honor. She's grown now with children of her own living in Denver, but I never forgot the woman who gave me the chance to be a mother. Every time I look at my grandchildren, I think of the woman who made their existence possible." Another voice spoke up from the crowd, Tom Hartwell, whose ranch bordered Augustus's property. He was a sturdy man in his 50s, with the kind of steady presence that made him a natural leader in the community. "She treated my father for lung fever the winter before she died," Tom said, his hat held respectfully in his hands. "Pa was coughing up blood, and we thought for sure he was going to die. Margaret came and stayed for 3 days, barely sleeping, mixing her remedies and keeping watch through the worst of it. When Pa finally turned the corner, she wouldn't take payment, just asked for a promise that we'd help someone else if we ever had the chance." Tom's eyes found Travis in the crowd. "I reckon she got that promise honored many times over through her son." The apple didn't fall far from the tree. One by one, other voices joined in, each testimony adding another layer to the picture of Margaret McKenna's life and character. There was the story of how she'd stayed with a family during a diphtheria outbreak, risking her own health to tend to 3 sick children. Another tale of how she'd helped deliver twins during a blizzard, working by candlelight when the lamp oil ran out. Yet another account of her nursing the entire family through food poisoning when they'd eaten spoiled meat during a particularly harsh winter. Each story painted the same picture, a woman who'd lived with purpose and compassion, who'd never turned away from suffering, who'd given freely of her knowledge and skill, regardless of her own circumstances. The testimonies revealed not just Margaret's character, but the ripple effects of her kindness that had spread through the community for decades. Augustus listened to each story with a growing sense of the magnitude of his loss to the community. He hadn't just turned away a desperate traveler, he'd condemned to death someone whose continued presence might have saved countless other lives over the years. The weight of that realization was almost unbearable, but it was a burden he knew he had to carry. When the testimonies ended, Augustus stepped forward again, his face etched with emotion that went beyond simple grief. In his hands, he held something he'd kept hidden from Travis, a smaller marker he'd had carved as a companion to the main headstone. "Margaret McKenna didn't die alone that night," he said, his voice thick with grief and shame. "She was carrying a child who would have been born within days. That baby deserves recognition too, deserves to be remembered as more than just a tragic footnote to her mother's story." Travis hadn't known about the second marker when Augustus knelt and placed it beside his mother's headstone, revealing the simple but beautifully carved inscription, "Baby McKenna. Gone too soon but not forgotten." Travis felt his carefully maintained composure finally crack completely. The smaller stone was carved from the same golden sandstone, its surface polished to a warm glow that complemented the larger memorial. Tiny angel wings were etched at the corners, and beneath the inscription was a single line that took Travis's breath away. "Loved before birth, remembered always, Tears flowed freely down Travis's weathered cheeks as he stared at the memorial for the sibling he'd never known. The brother or sister who might have shared his mother's gift for healing, who might have grown up to carry on Margaret's legacy in ways Travis couldn't imagine. The loss felt fresh and immediate, as if 30 years had collapsed into a single moment of grief. "I'm sorry," Augustus said, turning to face Travis directly, his own tears falling without shame. "I'm so desperately sorry for what my fear and pride cost you, cost your family, cost all of us. I can't undo what I did, but I swear to you, before God and all these witnesses, that I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor your mother's memory through my actions." Augustus's voice broke as he continued. "I was 23 years old and terrified of losing what little I'd managed to build. I told myself that charity was weakness, that kindness was something I couldn't afford. I was wrong about everything that mattered. And my wrongness killed 2 innocent people who deserved so much better." The rancher fell to his knees beside the graves, his hands pressed against the warm stone as if seeking absolution through touch. "Margaret, I know you can't hear me, but I need to say this. I failed you when you needed help most, and I've regretted it every day since. Your son is 10 times the man I was then, 100 times the man I deserved to meet. He saved my family when he had every right to let us suffer for my sins." Travis stood quietly for a long moment, his hand resting on the warm stone that now bore his mother's name. The wooden cross beneath his shirt seemed to pulse with warmth, and he could almost feel Ruth Calloway's approving presence beside him, along with something else, a gentler spirit that might have been his mother herself. "Augustus," Travis said finally, his voice steady despite his tears, "my mother taught me that forgiveness isn't something you earn through suffering or good works. It's something you choose to give, because hatred poisons the one who carries it. I forgave you the moment I learned the truth, not because you deserved it, but because carrying anger would dishonor everything she believed in." Augustus looked up from his kneeling position, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "How can you forgive so easily what I can barely forgive myself?" Travis knelt beside Augustus, placing a gentle hand on the older man's shoulder. "Because that's what love does when it's allowed to work freely. It transforms pain into purpose, tragedy into wisdom, regret into redemption. My mother's death wasn't meaningless if it leads to your transformation, if it helps you become the man you were meant to be. But the waste of it," Augustus whispered. "All the good she could have done, all the lives she could have saved if I'd just opened my door." "You can't change the past," Travis replied gently, "but you can honor it by choosing differently in the future. Every act of kindness you perform, every hand you extend to someone in need, every moment you choose compassion over fear, that's my mother's legacy living on through you." Travis extended his hand to Augustus, and the older man grasped it desperately, as if it were a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. The handshake became an embrace as both men wept openly, watched by a community that had witnessed something profound, the power of forgiveness to heal wounds that had festered for decades. Adelaide approached with baby William, who had remained remarkably quiet throughout the service, as if sensing the sacred nature of the moment. The infant's dark eyes were alert and curious, taking in the faces around him with the intense focus that babies sometimes display. "He should know about her," Adelaide said softly, offering the baby to Travis. "About the woman whose son gave him life." Travis accepted William into his arms, marveling at how the child seemed to settle immediately against his chest. "He's beautiful," Travis whispered, looking down at the tiny face with wonder. "Perfect and healthy and blessed with parents who love him deeply." "Thanks to you," Adelaide said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave him life, just as your mother would have done if she'd had the chance." Travis held William a moment longer, then handed him back to his mother. The baby's small hand briefly grasped Travis's finger with surprising strength, and for an instant, Travis could almost see his mother's smile reflected in the child's dark eyes. Turning to address the crowd one final time, Travis felt a peace settle over him that he hadn't experienced since Ruth's death. "Thank you all for coming today, for honoring my mother's memory, for helping transform this place from a forgotten grave into sacred ground. She would be overwhelmed by your kindness and humbled by your presence." He paused, looking out over the faces of people who had become more than neighbors. They had become family in the truest sense of the word. "My mother believed that healing was the highest calling any person could have, that every act of kindness ripples outward in ways we can't imagine. Today, all of you have participated in that healing. You've helped mend something that was broken, honor something that was forgotten, and create something beautiful from something tragic." As the service concluded and people began to disperse, many stopped to shake Travis's hand or share brief words of comfort. Some pressed small remembrances into his palm: wildflowers picked from the prairie, smooth stones from the creek, even a few coins for the continuing care of the gravesite. Mrs. Brennan lingered longer than the others, approaching Travis with something wrapped carefully in a piece of faded calico. "This belonged to your mother," she said quietly. "She gave it to me the night my daughter was born, said it had been her own mother's and that it should go to someone who understood its value." Travis unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small silver locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful in its simplicity. Inside was a lock of dark hair, his own, he realized, cut when he was a baby and preserved by a mother's love. "Thank you," Travis whispered, his voice too full of emotion for more words. As the hillside emptied and the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Augustus and Travis stood alone beside the twin graves. The inscribed stones caught the golden light, their carved letters deep and permanent against the warm sandstone. "What happens now?" Augustus asked quietly. Travis was silent for a moment, watching the shadows lengthen across the prairie grass. "Now we live in a way that honors what we've learned. We choose kindness over fear, forgiveness over revenge, hope over despair. We make sure that Margaret McKenna's death means something by ensuring that her values live on through us." Augustus nodded slowly, understanding that this was both an ending and a beginning. The guilt that had poisoned his thoughts for 30 years was finally lifting, replaced by something far more powerful: purpose guided by love rather than driven by fear. As they walked back toward the ranch house together, the evening star appeared in the darkening sky, bright and steady against the vast Wyoming heavens. Behind them, the memorial stones stood guard over sacred ground, ensuring that Margaret McKenna and her unborn child would never again be forgotten by the world they had tried so briefly to bless. 6 months later, the Wyoming spring had painted the prairie in brilliant greens and wildflower colors that seemed to celebrate the renewal of life itself. The harsh winter had given way to gentle warmth, and the land that had once seemed so unforgiving now appeared generous and welcoming under the soft May sunshine. Travis McKenna rode up the familiar path to the Whitfield ranch, his horse moving with the easy gait of an animal that knew it was heading home. The word still felt strange to Travis, even after all these months of regular visits. He'd never stayed in one place long enough for it to feel like home before, but something fundamental had changed that night when baby William took his first breath. Maybe it was the realization that some connections ran deeper than geography, that family could be chosen as well as born, that healing sometimes required putting down roots instead of constantly moving forward. The ranch looked different now, not just because of the season's changes, but because of the purposeful improvements Augustus had made over the winter months. A new bunkhouse had been built to accommodate the steady stream of travelers who now stopped at the Whitfield Ranch seeking medical assistance or temporary shelter. Word had spread throughout the territory that this was a place where no one in genuine need would be turned away. Augustus emerged from the barn as Travis approached, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure at the sight of his friend. The transformation in the rancher over the past months had been remarkable to witness. The guilt and shame that had once weighed him down like physical burdens had been replaced by purposeful action and quiet joy. He'd become the man his younger self had been too frightened to be, generous without calculation, Kind without expecting reward, strong enough to admit weakness, and wise enough to learn from past mistakes. "Travis," Augustus called out, striding forward to clasp his friend's hand with both of his own. Perfect timing. Adelaide just finished putting William down for his afternoon nap. "And she's been asking every hour when you be back from your rounds." Travis dismounted and tied his horse to the familiar hitching post, noticing the new medical supplies bag that Augustus had waiting for him. The rancher had taken to anticipating Travis's needs, ensuring that he never lacked for the tools necessary to help others. "How's our boy doing?" Travis asked, using the possessive pronoun that had become natural over the months. William belonged to all of them in different ways. To Augustus and Adelaide as parents, to Travis as the man who'd brought him safely into the world, to the entire community as a symbol of hope and new beginnings. "Growing like a weed and getting into everything he can reach," Augustus replied with obvious pride. "Adelaide swears he's going to be walking before his first birthday, and at the rate he's going, I believe her. Yesterday he managed to pull himself up to standing using the coffee table, and this morning I caught him trying to climb the stairs." They walked toward the house together, their friendship now easy and natural, despite its complicated origins. The path they followed had been worn smooth by countless conversations, shared meals, and quiet moments of understanding that had built trust more solid than any formal agreement could provide. "How did the Henderson delivery go?" Augustus asked, referring to Travis's latest call to assist with a difficult birth at a neighboring ranch. "Mother and baby both doing well," Travis replied with satisfaction. "Twin girls, healthy and strong. It was touch and go for a while when the second baby was breech, but we managed to turn her safely. Mrs. Henderson is already talking about naming one of them Margaret." Augustus smiled at this news. Over the past months, 3 babies in the territory had been named Margaret or some variation thereof, all in honor of the woman whose story had touched so many hearts. It was a legacy that grew stronger with each passing month, each life saved, each act of kindness performed in her memory. Travis had accepted Augustus's offer of a permanent position on the ranch, not as a hired hand, but as a partner in a new venture they'd established together. The Whitfield McKenna Foundation for Frontier Families provided medical assistance and emergency aid to isolated ranchers and travelers throughout the territory. Travis used his healing knowledge to help where he could, while Augustus provided the resources and connections necessary to make a real difference. The foundation had already assisted more than 40 families, providing everything from emergency medical care to temporary shelter during harsh weather. They'd established supply caches at strategic locations throughout the territory, ensuring that no one would face the kind of desperate circumstances that had claimed Margaret McKenna's life. Inside the house, Adelaide greeted Travis with the warm affection reserved for family. She'd never fully recovered her pre-pregnancy strength, but she glowed with contentment and purpose as she showed Travis the latest correspondence from their growing network of supporters. "Look at this," she said proudly, spreading letters across the kitchen table. "Donations from as far away as Denver and Salt Lake City. People are reading about what we're doing and wanting to help. There's even a letter from a group of doctors in Chicago who want to send medical supplies." Travis examined the letters with growing amazement. What had started as a simple desire to honor his mother's memory had grown into something larger than any of them had imagined. The story of forgiveness and redemption that had played out on the Whitfield Ranch had somehow captured people's imagination, inspiring them to contribute to a cause that embodied the best of human nature. "Mrs. Patterson from the territorial capital wants to arrange a speaking engagement," Adelaide continued, pointing to an official-looking envelope. "She thinks your story could inspire other communities to establish similar foundations." Travis shook his head with bemused wonder. "I never set out to inspire anyone. I just wanted to help where I could and honor my mother's memory." "That's exactly why people are inspired," Augustus said, joining them in the kitchen. "You're not preaching or seeking glory. You're just living according to your principles and letting the results speak for themselves. From upstairs came the soft sounds of baby William stirring from his nap, gentle, cooing noises that indicated he was awake but content. Adelaide rose to check on him, but Travis gestured for her to remain seated. "Let me," he said, climbing the stairs with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done this many times before. In the nursery, Travis found William sitting up in his crib, his dark eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. At 6 months old, the baby had developed a robust constitution and an engaging personality that charmed everyone who met him. He reached immediately for Travis, babbling in the complex nonsense language that babies use to express their thoughts. "Hello, little man," Travis murmured, lifting William from his crib and settling into the rocking chair beside the window. The baby settled against his chest with complete trust, and Travis marveled, as always, at how perfectly the child fit in his arms. Through the window, the memorial hill was visible in the distance, its twin headstones standing clearly against the green prairie grass. Travis had established a routine of visiting the graves every few days, sometimes bringing William along when the weather was nice. He'd tell the baby stories about his grandmother Margaret, describing her kindness and her healing gifts, ensuring that the child would grow up knowing about the woman whose legacy had shaped his life before he was even born. "Your mom and papa are downstairs planning ways to help more people," Travis said softly, beginning the kind of one-sided conversation that had become their tradition. "Your grandmother would be so proud of what they're doing, how they've turned sorrow into purpose." William's response was a string of happy sounds that Travis chose to interpret as agreement. The baby's hands patted Travis's chest, and Travis wondered if the child could somehow sense the wooden cross that still hung beneath his shirt. The simple carved symbol had become more than just a connection to his mother. It was a reminder of the values she'd instilled in him, the importance of choosing compassion over convenience, love over fear. A soft knock on the doorframe announced Adelaide's presence. She stood watching them with a smile that spoke of deep contentment and gratitude that would never fully fade. "He adores you," she said quietly. "Sometimes I think he knows what you did for him that night." "He's a special child," Travis replied, standing to hand William back to his mother. "He's going to grow up knowing that love is stronger than fear, that kindness matters more than wealth, that every person deserves compassion regardless of their circumstances." As if understanding the weight of this conversation, William reached out and grasped Travis's finger with his small hand, holding on with the determined grip that had become his trademark. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, seemed to focus intently on Travis's face, as if memorizing features that would always represent safety and protection. From his vest pocket, Travis withdrew a small package wrapped in soft cloth, a gift he'd been saving for this visit. "I brought him something special," he said, offering the package to Adelaide. Inside the wrapping were tiny knitted booties, expertly crafted from the softest wool in a delicate blue that complemented William's coloring. The stitching was intricate and beautiful, clearly the work of skilled hands guided by loving attention to detail. Small white ribbons threaded through the tops would allow the booties to stay securely on active little feet. "They're beautiful," Adelaide breathed, examining the delicate workmanship with obvious appreciation. "The detail is extraordinary." "Who made them?" "Mrs. Sarah Brennan," Travis replied with a gentle smile. "She remembered that my mother had knitted similar booties for her daughter 30 years ago, tiny things that her Margaret wore until she outgrew them. Mrs. Brennan kept them all these years as a remembrance of my mother's kindness." She wanted William to have something that connected him to Margaret's memory, something made with the same love and care that my mother put into everything she did. Adelaide's eyes filled with tears as she understood the full significance of the gift. These weren't just baby shoes. They were a tangible link to the woman whose legacy had brought their family together, whose memory continued to inspire acts of kindness throughout the territory. "She'll always be part of our family, won't she?" Adelaide asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Your mother, I mean." even though we never met her, even though she died before any of this was possible. Always, Travis confirmed without hesitation. Every time William takes a breath, every time he laughs or cries or reaches for something new, she's here with us. That's how love works. It doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to express itself through the people whose lives it has touched. Augustus joined them in the nursery, carrying a cup of coffee for Travis and settling into the chair beside the crib. The afternoon light streaming through the windows caught the silver frame of a new photograph on the nearby shelf, a picture of the memorial service, showing the entire community gathered around Margaret McKenna's headstone. Beside it sat Travis's mother's Bible, now permanently displayed as a reminder of the faith that had sustained her through her brief but meaningful life. "I got a letter from Jonas Carpenter yesterday," Augustus said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of good news shared. "He's had 7 requests for similar memorial work since our service. Seems we've started something of a movement to honor forgotten graves throughout the territory. People are realizing that everyone deserves to be remembered, that every life has value worth preserving." Travis nodded with deep satisfaction. This was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all, the knowledge that Margaret's story was inspiring others to honor their own forgotten dead, to ensure that no one's life would pass unremembered or unmarked. "There's more," Augustus continued, pulling a folded letter from his shirt pocket. "The territorial governor wants to establish a formal program based on our foundation. He's proposing legislation that would fund medical assistance for isolated communities, ensuring that no family faces the kind of crisis we experienced without help." Travis felt a warm glow of pride that had nothing to do with personal recognition and everything to do with seeing his mother's values spreading far beyond anything she could have imagined. Margaret McKenna's life had been brief, but its impact was growing with each passing month, each life saved, each act of kindness performed in her memory. "She would be amazed by all of this," Travis said quietly, looking out the window toward the memorial hill. She never thought of herself as someone important enough to be remembered by so many people, let alone someone whose story could inspire a territory-wide movement. "The best people rarely do," Adelaide observed, adjusting William's position so he could see out the window. "They're too busy living their values to worry about their legacy." As the afternoon wore on, the 3 adults took turns holding William, sharing stories about the Foundation's work, planning future initiatives, and simply enjoying the peaceful domesticity that had become so precious to all of them. Travis found himself thinking about the strange turns life could take, how a single night could change everything, how the worst of circumstances could ultimately lead to the best of outcomes. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Travis prepared to take his leave. But Augustus stopped him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Stay for supper," Augustus said, and it was more invitation than request. "Mrs. Patterson is sending a representative next week to discuss the speaking engagement, and we should plan what you want to say." Travis considered for a moment, then nodded. He had nowhere else he needed to be, and increasingly this felt like where he belonged. The wooden cross beneath his shirt seemed to pulse with warmth against his chest, and for a moment he could almost feel his mother's presence in the room, not as a ghost or memory, but as a living force of love that connected all things, healed all wounds, and transformed every ending into a new beginning. As Adelaide prepared supper and Augustus played with William on the parlor floor, Travis stood at the window watching the last light of day fade over the memorial hill. The twin headstones were barely visible in the gathering dusk, but he knew they were there, standing guard over sacred ground, ensuring that Margaret McKenna and her unborn child would never again be forgotten by the world they had tried so briefly to bless. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities that would have seemed impossible just 6 months earlier. There would be more babies to deliver, more families to help, more lives to touch with the healing knowledge Ruth had passed down, and Margaret's memory continued to inspire. It was good work, meaningful work, the kind of legacy that honored the dead while serving the living. Sometimes the most precious moments in life really do come when we least expect them. Travis reflected as he listened to baby William's delighted laughter echoing through the house. And sometimes the sound of a child's joy really is the most beautiful music in the world, especially when that joy exists because strangers chose to trust each other, because ancient wrongs were forgiven, because love proved stronger than fear, and because a mother's legacy of healing lived on in hands that remembered her teachings and a heart that honored her memory.